Well, good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, I would like to welcome you to tonight's webinar, ADS-B Equipage and Installation. With me tonight as a presenter is Todd Adams. Todd is the manager of Lancaster Avionics, a radio shop in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He's worked for the business since 1989 and has served as its manager for about 10 years. He's been a co-owner of the shop for about the last 3 years. So Todd is not new to avionics. He's also not new to ADS-B. Back in around 1998, I think it was, Todd installed the first generation of ADS-B equipment, the same stuff used in the FAA's Capstone project in a Bonanza that AOPA owned. Todd, hopefully you have some fond memories of 7236 whiskey.
That was a long time ago, and things have morphed over many times over to get to where we are today.
Well, thanks for joining us tonight, Todd. My name is Mike Collins. I am a technical editor for AOPA's media channels. I've been an editor for AOPA for 22 years, I guess it is. I am a subject matter expert for ADS-B. I guess I must have missed a meeting or something because I've been covering it since the Capstone days in the 1990s. Yeah, and so we appreciate you joining us tonight. We've got a rather full evening. Before I go on to our agenda, I'd like to give you a little information about the audio. If you lose the audio on your webinar, if you're using an iPad or an iPhone, click the play button to hear the sound. Sometimes you have to stop the sound and restart it by tapping on that button. If you're on a PC, you can refresh the screen or you can exit the webinar and log back in. Hopefully you don't have any technical problems, but if you do, the webinar will be available for playback at your leisure after it ends. Maybe not immediately, but certainly by tomorrow. So again, we hope you have a good experience with the webinar. Tonight, we're going to discuss quite a few things. We're going to go through some of them pretty quickly. We're going to talk about what is ADS-B, how does it work, when and where is ADS-B required, what are the benefits of ADS-B out, which is mandated for certain airspace beginning in 2020, what are the benefits of ADS-B in, which is optional. There's a pitfall of the use of portable ADS-B receivers we want to make sure you understand. And then Todd's going to talk a little bit about his approach to helping aircraft owners assess their needs as they prepare to equip for the 2020 ADS-B mandate. We will apply his approach to some case studies, and then hopefully we'll have time for some questions. So what is ADS-B? It's Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast. It's a key enabling technology for the FAA's next generation of air traffic control. Basically in the system, and I'm going through this pretty quickly. I feel like a lot of you know the basics of the system, but I do want to lay down a foundation in case anybody is not familiar with it or is unclear. So the way it works, aircraft position is determined via WAAS GPS positioning, and then it's periodically broadcast to other aircraft and also to air traffic control stations on the ground. Eventually, the ADS-B has the potential to replace many of today's secondary surveillance radar. The ADS-B position information is also sent automatically to other ADS-B equipped aircraft. So what does the ADS and B stand for? It's automatic. You don't have to do anything. Dependent, it relies on systems aboard the aircraft. Surveillance is, I guess we left that off the slide, Todd, or I did. It means it's monitoring your aircraft's position, and then broadcast, it's automatically broadcast to ATC ground stations and to other aircraft. How does ADS-B work? The WAAS and enhanced GPS signals are received by the aircraft. Then the aircraft turn around and transmit that information along with their barometric altitude from the transponder's encoder once each second. That position information is received, as I said, by other aircraft on the same ADS-B frequency and by ATC ground stations. There are two ADS-B frequencies. We'll talk about that shortly. So the position of aircraft is rebroadcast to ADS-B equipped aircraft that are using the other frequency. That way everybody can see everybody else. And everyone's position is displayed on the ATC radar scopes. So let's look at a quick sort of poor man's animation of how this works. So here's our artist depiction of the National Airspace System. We've got 3 airplanes flying around. The weather is much more clear than what we're experiencing in Maryland this evening. And they're all receiving very accurate position information from WAAS-enhanced GPS satellites. So then they turn around once every second and they broadcast that GPS position out into space, but it can be received by other users who need that data. The two aircraft, the aircraft at the right and the aircraft at the bottom, they're on the same ADS-B frequency, and so they see each other immediately, but all the aircraft are broadcasting their position to the FAA's ground station. That's the tower there at the bottom. So then the tower turns around and rebroadcasts positions to aircraft that do not receive them directly. So as a result, everybody sees everybody with the potential to provide significantly enhanced situational awareness. And then, of course, we add in a control tower to show that the controllers get the same information. When and where is ADS-B required? After January 1st, 2020, it's basically going to be required any place that a Mode C transponder is required today. So Class A, B, and C airspace, Class E above 10,000 feet, excluding any airspace at or below 2,500 feet, anywhere within or above the 30 nautical mile Class B primary airport, what we all call the Mode C veil, above Class Bravo or Charlie airspace up to 10,000 feet, and also Class E airspace over the Gulf of Mexico and above 3,000 feet within 12 nautical miles of the coast, which is remarkably busy airspace for those of you who've flown there. What are the benefits of ADS-B out? Well, one key benefit is that you can continue to operate within the ADS-B mandated airspace. That's an important consideration for many of us. There's the potential for better ATC services thanks to increased visibility and more accurate position information, and pilots are reporting that they're being offered services that they haven't been offered before. So there really is some neat stuff happening. You also have the potential to receive ATC services in non-radar airspace because now they can see you even though they don't have radar equipment, ground-based radar. Of course, a lot of the real benefit to general aviation comes from ADS-B in, which is not mandated by the FAA at this time. Many pilots have been using fairly inexpensive receivers to utilize this traffic information and weather information, even though they have not yet equipped with ADS-B out. So this information can be displayed on a cockpit display or a portable display, something like an iPad or an iPhone even. The FISB, Flight Information Services Broadcast, is the subscription-free ADS-B weather. It includes NEXRAD radar, METARs and TAFs, NOTAMs, airmits, SIGMATs, winds aloft, temperatures aloft, PIREPs. Coming later this year, I understand, I don't know the exact timing, is lightning data and echo tops, which will round out in a very good way the weather information provided through the FISB service. One thing about ADS-B out is that it assures you that you're seeing the full traffic picture. If you're using a portable ADS-B receiver without ADS-B out installed in your aircraft, you're not receiving all the available traffic information. That's because the traffic broadcasts are triggered by the ADS-B out emitted by an ADS-B equipped aircraft, and it only delivers data to within a specific service volume around that aircraft. I'm going to hand it over to Todd and let him discuss an experience that one of my coworkers had a few years ago that really shows this pitfall.
What we're looking at here, guys, is a diagram. We're going to have a series of pictures here, sort of, running through the scenario. I had the pleasure of doing a webinar with Eric Rush of AOPA right here at Lancaster Airport some time ago. And Eric actually used a real-life experience as a demonstration on helping to understand what ADS-B is, putting aside all the technicalities of frequencies and so on and so forth. So to give you the background story on this, Eric lives up here in Pennsylvania, and he has the pleasure of pretty much flying to work every day down to Frederick every day. And given that he is putting that many flight hours on a year, he does a lot of beta testing for the software on different apps. And I know that Eric can have as many as 3 portable systems at any given time running at the same time in his aircraft during those travels. And it just so happens that one morning he was en route. The X at the top of the screen there, the blue X, represents where he started from, and the bottom X is representing Frederick, Maryland, where he's headed to. And on this particular morning, he was en route, and all of a sudden, all 3 portable systems lit up with traffic all over the place. Now, of course, when you're seeing this traffic information on devices, whether it's portable equipment, iPads, or even the panel-mounted displays, you don't have the luxury of the red dotted line that is representing a 15 nautical mile radius around the center aircraft. So if you can visualize Eric looking at his screen and seeing all of these airplanes, and for all I know it could have been more than this on this screen, he was absolutely enamored by how well the system was working at that particular moment in time. So here he's seeing all this traffic, and he's thinking to himself, wow, this thing has really got my back. And that's when we're going to move on to the next slide, which is a replicate drawing. But if you notice that aircraft just off of Eric's right-hand wing, Eric was pretty busy looking at all this traffic on his 3 displays and comparing the 3 to see if there was one was showing that the other wasn't. And he didn't have his eyes outside of the cockpit as much as he would have liked to that morning. And here was this aircraft that was coming in off his right wing. And quite frankly, that experience was a real eye-opener to Eric that morning. Needless to say, once he got to Frederick, he made the quickest possible plans to become ADS-B out compliant. And here is why. That 15 nautical mile ring represents all the aircraft that he was seeing that morning. The problem with the equation without being ADS-B out compliant is that he was actually picking up traffic data that was intended for someone else's aircraft. In effect, the aircraft that's in white at the center of that circle. What was happening, that aircraft was ADS-B out compliant. He had a WASH GPS that was providing lat-long data. He also had the ADS-B transceiver that was broadcasting that data down to a ground station, along with identification of the aircraft and the aircraft's mode C, and also a request signal to send a data packet, a 15 nautical mile radius, 3,000 feet above, 3,000 feet below data packet, a cylinder of surveillance of all the aircraft in that area for that aircraft. The one thing that is important to understand, that if you are not ADS-B out compliant, the only data that the portable equipment is going to get is intended for somebody else. And when you're in flight, you don't know where that aircraft is and whose data you're getting. So on this particular morning, his portable devices acted as parasites, and they're just sniffing the air out there looking for a signal that they can understand. And that morning they picked one up from this other aircraft and showed all the aircraft that you see here. So as we move on to the next slide, this is a depiction of the same scenario had Eric been ADS-B out compliant. Once he's out compliant using the same portable equipment, he is sending his GPS lat-long data, his aircraft mode C altitude, his aircraft identification down to the ground station and requesting a specific personalized data packet up to his airplane. Had he been ADS-B compliant on that morning, he would have seen the aircraft that took him by surprise off his right wing. And that is probably the easiest explanation of the importance of compliance when using these portable devices and understanding what their limitations are. So, moving on to your next slide there, Mike.
Yes, let me take this one. I just want to update everybody because this ADS-B out traffic situation might be poised for a change. The AOPA Air Safety Institute has been lobbying the FAA to open up the ADS-B traffic to all ADS-B receivers. What has happened is the FAA has agreed in principle that this is the right thing to do for safety, and they've gone to the next step where they've asked their contractors to assess the technological feasibility and the costs of doing this. Last I heard, this process is still underway, but traffic could be as unlocked as early as the end of this year. So we'll keep you posted as we learn more on that. But for those who are flying with portable receivers and are not yet ADS-B out compliant, this change would basically, if Eric was flying under an unlocked traffic situation, even before he got ADS-B out equipped, he would have seen that airplane that caught him a little bit by surprise. So when it comes to ADS-B, there are quite a few suppliers. Todd and his shop are dealers for all of these. Do you want to run through these a little, Todd?
Sure, I can. You know, we certainly didn't want to single anybody out this evening. The one thing to keep in mind with ADS-B solutions is I have installed at least one, if not multiple, ADS-B solutions from every single one of these manufacturers to date. And the one key thing, the key element to this whole discussion, and we'll touch base on this a little more later, is that every aircraft is different. We may see similarities between certain airframes and certain equipage. At the end of the day, there is application for each one of these manufacturers' equipment in airplanes out there. Some of them are more of a niche market, some of them are more mainstream, but there are applications for each one of these. And just to run through a few, of course, APPAREO has just released their ESG transponders. You know, they've got some interesting technology that can integrate some of their portable equipment in through their new transponder. The current status on that is that they do have TSO, but we're still waiting on the STC AML before we really go full swing in starting that product. You've got Avidyne. Avidyne has a line of ADS-B solutions. They've got their AXP340 transponder. They've got the MLX200, which is a UAT in-out, and then they also have the MLB100, which has since been renamed, but it's basically still the MLB100 as a receive-only box. Dynon is sort of the for lack of better terms, the odd one in this equation. But the good news is there that some of the experimental and LSA aircraft that have the Dynon equipment, they do have solutions for those aircraft that will integrate quite well. In fact, I've got, let's see, I've got my list here. They have their own Mode-S transponder. They also have a WAS certified GPS that meets the specifications for ADS-B, and of course then they have the UAT itself, and so there's some solutions there for the experimental and LSA applications. Of course, Garmin's there. You know, they started out, you know, with acquisition of UPS Technologies, who originally was well vested in the original Capstone systems. With acquisition, Garmin assumed that and came out with products like the now the GDL90, which morphed into the GDL88 series. They've since come out with a line of transponders that have replaced the older GTX 330 that have optional built-in GPS if you don't have a panel-mounted unit. Similar to the APPAREO has that feature as well, where they have the built-in GPS. But they also have kind of taken a GDL88, which is the remote-mounted UAT, and put that within a transponder called the GTX 345. NavWorks, it's what they're offering are remote-mounted UATs. They've got a variety of product there, anything from the uncertified experimental series to the certified models. One of the unique characteristics of the NavWorks product is a device called a Transmon that is unique to the industry. It's a device that clamps onto your existing transponder coax and allows that device to pick up through transmission through that coax your squawk code and your mode C altitude. Aspen has some ADS-B solutions. They've actually partnered with L3 Communications, and I'll touch base on that in a moment, as well as Free Flight, offering some ADS-B solutions where to complement their main line, which of course is their primary flight displays that they sell. There's also recently they've gotten approval and unlocks to interface to existing GDL88 technology, and from what I understand, interface with the Garmin 345s is close. Bendix King, they have worked with Free Flight as well to have the KGX 130 and the KGX 150, which would work well for any of those out there that have the KSN 770 GPS Navcom. And then there's Free Flight themselves. As you've already heard, they've sort of made some product for some other manufacturers in this group, very similar in design to NavWorks and application. Remote-mounted UAT, in-out solutions, Wi-Fi options, and then there's L3 Systems. They have a pretty good line. They have probably one of the most unique solutions out there if you're looking for an in-out solution combined with active traffic and possibly TAWS certification in their NGT 9000, NGT 9000 Plus, and their diversity models as well. That particular product can be an all-in-one, given that it's got its own display for weather and traffic without having to rely on any other displays to show the data, which is one of the big things that makes it very unique. And therefore, it is a system that could theoretically be considered for any make-model airplane out there as a self-contained complete system. And lastly, we have Trig. Trig has made some transponders, both of their own brand. They have also worked with Bendix King to come up with like the KT-74, which can be and I use this term loosely, slide-in replacement for the KT-76A and C transponders. I say loosely with slide in because for actual compliance there is extra work to be done, but it will physically slide into the same tray. And they have some, one other unique thing about the Trig product line is they have products like the TT22 and the TT31 or 32, I forget the model, but they are uniquely packaged for some of those cockpits that are very limited in panel space and panel depth. So there are a lot of things to choose from out there, and you know, one of the key elements in this is trying to find the right product for your aircraft, for your application. I think I've run out of breath there, Mike.
Well, that was that was an excellent explanation. The one thing, though, because I think the next slide is yours, so I'm going to give you a second to catch your breath, Todd. The one thing I did want to emphasize, because as Todd mentioned, a number of these ADS-B products include GPS receivers to provide the WAS position information that's required for the ADS-B compliance. But I just want to make sure everyone understands that these are what you call blind receivers. They receive the GPS information and they pass it on to the FAA ground stations and to other aircraft through the ADS-B, but you cannot use that WAS signal for navigation. Todd will get into this a little bit later, but if you have an older GPS but you do a lot of instrument flying, you might really want to think about upgrading to a WAS GPS so that you can unlock the ability to use the new generation of GPS approaches, the LNAV, VNAV, and all those good ones in your flying, because there are so many of them these days. It's kind of part of the holistic approach of looking at ADS-B, and that kind of launches us into some of Todd's key considerations as you begin to venture down this ADS-B highway.
Thanks, Mike. And you know, I kind of put rule number 1 there, not to insinuate that I have rule number 2, 3, and 4, but you know, to me, my approach to ADS-B is basically the same approach that I have to anybody looking to upgrade their aircraft, whether they have to or want to. It's really irrelevant. The keynote there is you're the customer, and you know, unless your ADS-B compliance is really obvious, you know, maybe you have a certain GPS navcom in there and you know that this particular like manufacturer's product will interface with that the best that any product can. I would strongly recommend that you speak with an avionics shop that, you know, number 1, represents all the ADS-B manufacturers relevant to your situation. The last thing that you want to do is you know, it's sort of like going to Oshkosh, and you know, certainly not knocking Oshkosh. It's a great place, but when you go to a manufacturer stand, you are going to get their sales pitch, and when it comes to ADS-B, you want to make sure that the person you're talking to seek guidance has enough access to enough products to truly let you know what all your options are. And in order to achieve that, they must also be interested and willing to install that product that fits your needs. Like I said, I've installed every manufacturer's equipment up to this point, and I can assure you that it wasn't just for the sake of doing it. It's because this manufacturer's product fit this situation, and another manufacturer's equipment fit this other situation better. It all comes down to that. And when you look at the situation, it's not just about the airplane. It's not just about the pilot. You know, it's about what today's plans are. You got to start thinking, doing some forward thinking, as Mike brought up. You know, maybe you do have a panel that you're going to have to put money into sometime down the line because you've got some old radios and maybe you've missed a couple upgrade cycles due to economic reasons or whatever. Choices that you make today for ADS-B can greatly impact your level of satisfaction down the road. For example, if you today said, Todd, my main focus is getting the least expensive ADS-B solution just to become compliant. I am not interested in any I just want to be out compliant. One of the things that you'll hear from me is, what are your plans for 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road? Do you plan on still owning the airplane? What about the rest of your avionics? Because the potential is there that if, say, 5 years down the road you put that panel-mounted GPS in, you could end up with buyer's remorse in the choice of making the least costly choice today. You could have taken that money and maybe had applied it to a different product that would blend so much better with the GPS that you ultimately put in 5 years down the road. So it's very important to have those conversations to make sure that you're not cutting your nose off to spite your face later on down the line. Now, getting back to the display here, ADS-B installations, as Mike said, they have to utilize a WASP GPS receiver, and here's the key, that meets the ADS-B requirements. Even when right now we're dealing with 3 manufacturers of GPS systems as far as the panel mount stuff goes, the Avidyne, the King, and the Garmin. Even the WASP GPS receivers, when they first came out, they at that point did not meet the requirements for ADS-B WASP. It required some software upgrades and some other changes in order to get to what we have today. So what I'm saying here is, just because it's a WASP GPS receiver does not necessarily mean that it is a WASP receiver that meets the ADS-B requirements. The other key element in ADS-B installations that you have to have is your aircraft mode C must be accessible to the ADS-B solution. In other words, the same mode C altitude that your transponder sees, the ADS-B solution has to see that as well. Now, I mentioned earlier, as an example, with NavWorks, they have that device called the Transmon. It has the ability of picking that data up from that clamp-on device on your transponder coax. Again, that's unique to the industry. The other ADS-B systems don't have that. Now, in the event that you put a Mode S transponder in, by default, that transponder will utilize your existing standard encoder in the airplane. But for those remote-mounted UATs that you may elect to install, we have had to replace numerous altitude encoders because they would only send out gray code, which is what all transponders use today. The ADS-B UATs, they need to have a source of serial altitude via an RS-232 format. So in many cases, we had to pull out the old encoder, install a new encoder that has both gray code and serial output. Getting more into the installation side of things, we're obviously talking about 3 different types of aircraft. There's the type certificated aircraft, the light sport, and the experimental home built. There is a significant diversity between equipage of these 3 types of airplanes. The experimental home built environment, they do have the option of installing non-certified equipment, provided that the equipment meets the design performance of the ADS-B spec. So there is some latitude there. I know of several experimental aircraft that I'm just going to pull an example that might have the Garmin touchscreen stuff in it. Garmin does offer some of the experimental WASP receivers and ADS-B systems that will play well with that and meet that requirement. I'm going to skip past the light sport for a second and talk about type certificated aircraft. Of course, as of today, at least, all of that equipment must be certified for ADS-B and for WASP ADS-B requirements. most of the installations, I have yet to run across one that I've had to do a field approval, but there is a path if you have a unique airframe that has not made it onto anybody's STC AML list, that there is room to get field approvals based on the equipment itself. But I've not run across that to date, but I know sooner or later I'm going to run into that. So those installations tend to be pretty straightforward because the approval basis is there already. The light sport category is one of those that are in the middle, and I'm finding that the light sport category can be a bit of a challenge. The one exception to that I can note is, of course, the light sport aircraft that have the Dynon equipment in it. Dynon has, provided a clear path, and in the big scheme of things, a fairly inexpensive path to getting that ADS-B compliance. But a couple uniquenesses about the light sport aircraft. First of all, whatever ADS-B solution that is going to be put in that aircraft, there must be a letter of authorization from the light sport manufacturer themselves. I have done this on several occasions to date. I have worked closely with a number of these manufacturers through import facilities and maintenance facilities for these aircraft. The keynote there is you have to have that LOA. Now, there is a potential, and I've heard some rumor to this, that if, just as an example, let's say that there's 12 possible ADS-B systems you can put in an LSA airplane. The manufacturer does reserve the right to say, well, we're only going to focus on these two solutions. So there is the potential that the LSA manufacturer can limit what units will ultimately end up in your aircraft. I haven't run into that too much yet, but I've heard some talk about it. But we'll see where that all ends up at the end of the day. Some other challenges that we've run into to date: a lot of the light sport aircraft are composite or carbon fiber airframes. That within itself can add some challenges for finding proper antenna locations and such. It can also present some challenges because, unlike most type certificated airplanes, they don't have a designated avionics shelf to bolt new equipment down, like UATs, that sort of thing. And a lot of these aircraft also don't have regular radio stacks as we think about in Cessna 182s and Navajos and Aztecs. They tend to have, smaller instruments like the 2 1/4 inch, round comms and the 2 1/4 inch transponders, that sort of thing. So there are definitely some challenges within the light sport and experimental category. In fact, I have run into sort of a worst case scenario I'd want to share tonight. And again, I will expand upon that later with one of our case studies. But I had the opportunity to do a light sport aircraft. I don't recall the exact model, but it was a fairly small aircraft that was, it was a fabric-covered airplane. And one of the challenges of installing ADS-B systems is that antenna location. You cannot have the UAT antenna within so many feet of your transponder antenna. And of course, the smaller the airframe, the less latitude you have for maintaining that minimum distance. In this particular case, the only place that the antenna would go was far back in the tail boom. And unfortunately, there was zero access into that tail area on this particular airframe. So before the customer could even purchase the equipment and come in and have me install this equipment, he had to make alternate arrangements with a shop that was familiar with doing dope and fabric work. He took it to them, and he had to have an inspection hole created in the tail of the aircraft, and of course that all dressed up. And then at that point, he had them physically create structure back there to mount the UAT antenna, close everything up, and run a coax forward before he could ever arrive at my shop to have it done. In that particular case, he did buy and get approved by the LSA manufacturer to save some money on the equipment, and he bought the experimental version of the NavWorks device. But of course, I had the added challenge of having to create all kinds of new bracketry and such, just even getting the UAT mounted. So there were some mounting costs there, and of course I didn't have an adequate place to put a GPS antenna, short of creating structure between some tubular frames in order to mount that antenna. So at the end of the day, in comparison to, say, a typical comparable installation in a Cessna 182, this installation ended up being about double of what it would have been in a type certificated aircraft because of the custom work. And therein lies the challenge with the light sport and some of the experimental aircraft. Can we flip on to the next screen there, Mike?
We certainly can.
There you go. I think that's yours, isn't it? Oh, no, that's still mine. I'm sorry. To sort of cover transponder versus UAT for a moment, there are two methods of ADS-B out compliance. You can either do a transponder or you can do a UAT. Now, the difference between the two is, and this is where I tend to like to stay away from getting into the frequency differences in that. I've found that I can lose an audience if we get too technical with that, but transponders that are the Mode S variety with the extended squitter, you are complying with the ADS-B requirement via the 1090 frequency. The 1090 frequency is required for aircraft above 18,000 feet, is required for Part 135 operations, as well as some international flight. So if you find yourself in a situation where you meet any one of those three criteria, then by default you're going to have to comply with ADS-B via the transponder.
Let me interrupt for just a second on the international flight, because I just want to emphasize what you said there, and you were mentioning earlier about thinking ahead and looking forward. Right now, there are quite a few countries that have, or at least have announced, ADS-B out mandates to operate in their airspace. In many countries, it's only at high altitude airspace, or it's being phased in all around the world. What I suggest to people is, if you fly internationally, you really should just go ahead and equip with 1090 the Mode S extended squitter now, because the United States is the only country that offers the other option. If you have the UAT option and want to fly into any place else, you would be faced with having to potentially upgrade or change your ADS-B solution to fly. The countries everybody always asks about, Canada does have some Mode S ADS-B requirements. It's right now, and I think it's above flight level 250, only like in the far northwestern part of the country. So that doesn't affect most of us, but Canada is involved in a consortium that is developing a satellite-based Mode S ADS-B. So there's a lot of signs that at some point in the future, we don't know when, Canada could have a 1090 mandate. Mexico recently published a final rule that becomes effective mostly along the same timetable as ours, 2020, except for, I think, their Gulf Coast airspace becomes effective in 2018. But Mexico is requiring 1090 Mode S for ADS-B, mostly in terminal airspace. The Bahamas, nobody's really heard anything about a potential mandate from the Bahamas, so we really don't know until they come out with the rule. But for those of you who are looking at Cuba as a possible GA destination in the next few years, Cuba has no mandate, but they are testing Mode S extended Squitter for ADS-B out. So if you fly internationally or you plan to, really consider the Mode S solution because it's very likely to be required eventually in most other countries, at least abutting the United States. Sorry, back to your slide.
No, not a problem. In fact, I can reiterate that as well from personal experience. That very question is being asked more and more all the time. And one thing that I want to stay away from tonight is pricing, but consider that it is very likely that when you compare in many instances what it may cost you to do a UAT solution versus some of the transponder solutions out there now today, I have routinely seen where the difference in price can be as less as $700, sometimes $1,000 more to do the transponder. And for that kind of price differential, to have the peace of mind that it's not going to be a limiting factor should any of these other countries decide to change their current status. I'm hearing from my customers that can be very well worth it. Not to mention the fact that many of the aircraft that we see today do in fact have older transponders in them. If you've got a newer digital transponder, even of the Mode C version, it takes away a little bit of the argument, but still, the price comparison at the end of the day is close enough where it will make you stop and think before you actually purchase. Moving along here, just to be clear, the 1090, assuming you don't meet one of those three requirements, is not required. I still get a lot of calls. People think that they have to have 1090 in order to meet the ADS-B compliance for the U.S. here. That is not the case. 978 is certainly an acceptable method. You do not have to have the 1090. Of course, the UATs, they all operate on the 978 frequency. And of course, that will be acceptable anywhere in the U.S., provided you're not 135 or not going above 18,000 feet. And of course, that is the frequency which is going to provide your subscription-free ADS-B weather should you choose to do an in solution. ADS-B in, as it's been said a couple times now, is not required for ADS-B compliance. But there is one thing that I think I want to address right now, because I'm not sure if I'll capture it later. I see a lot of customers that are using the portable devices. And we've already talked about the limitation from a traffic standpoint as far as whether you get traffic or whether you don't get traffic based on whether you're ADS-B out compliant or not. I want to take that conversation just a little bit further. Let's assume that you have an aircraft that is ADS-B out compliant and you're using a portable device. There is a difference between receiving data, traffic data, from a portable device as compared to having an integrated ADS-B in system. The entire traffic world, whether you're talking about TIS, TIS-A, TIS-B, TAS, TCAS-1, TCAS-2, is all based on aircraft Mode C altitude. When you're using a portable device, you have to keep in mind that since the portable device has no idea what your aircraft Mode C is, it's only reading what everybody else's Mode C is, it has to use the next best thing as an altitude comparison. and that is GPS altitude. And GPS altitude can be as much as 700 feet differential between what your aircraft mode C is. Now, under most circumstances, it's going to be a lot closer than that, but it does have the potential to be that much different. So there is a potential that the ADS-B traffic that you get on your iPad from a portable device may actually show you as a target until that separation becomes small enough where it realizes that you are you and therefore disappears off the screen. It is for that reason that I often tell customers that the portable ADS-B systems are 95 to 97% as good as the ADS-B in systems that are integrated into the aircraft. Now, with respect to traffic itself, I already mentioned in the first three that are there, what is the difference between the TIS or TIS-A traffic versus the TIS-B traffic. A number of you may already be ADS-B out compliant, maybe with a King KT74 transponder, an Avidyne AXP340, a Garmin GTX 330 ES, and many of these systems have been in for a while, and you've been receiving traffic all along, even before this ADS-B thing came to fruition. What you're receiving on a display, maybe you have a Garmin 430, a 530, something in that nature, you're actually receiving TIS-A traffic. TIS-A traffic is, it started out with a number of stations broadcasting this, located generally at larger populated areas or larger airports. That system is slowly fading away. And therefore, if you continue to rely on TIS-A traffic into the future, you may find that you've got less and less coverage. And that is where TIS-B comes into play. Many of you, if you haven't already, you can certainly look up on the internet the TIS-B tower layout, and I'm sure you will find that the amount of towers and the coverage for TIS-B is far greater than what it's ever been for TIS-A. And there lies the transition to ADS-B and TIS-B traffic. The one thing to keep in mind is that, and I'll use the example of the Garmin 330 because I see those more often than anything else. I have customers that have the non-extended Squitter, non-ES GTX 330s, and I get asked if that's good for compliance. The answer to that is no. It needs to be upgraded to extended Squitter. Now, prior to upgrade to extended Squitter, the customer may be getting TIS-A traffic. The false impression that they get is that if they do the upgrade to extended Squitter, that the traffic that they'll get from their existing transponder becomes TIS-B. That is a false statement. Even when you have upgraded to the ES and you have made your aircraft ADS-B out compliant, the only traffic that you will get from that particular transponder is TIS-A. It does not become TIS-B. The only way you're going to get TIS-B at that point is if you get a portable device, or if you put in a UAT, or you exchange that transponder out for something newer, like in that case maybe a Garmin GTX 345, which has become very popular. There is also some consideration when thinking about portable devices as well as the integrated in receivers. Is the system that you're buying single band or dual band? What is the difference between the two? Well, single band typically means that you're only receiving traffic on the 978 frequency. Single band, I guess, technically could mean that you're only receiving it on 1090, but I believe that's only going to be most of the TIS-A stuff. The dual band means that you're receiving traffic on both frequencies, the 978 and the 1090. In the case of a dual band system, as of right now, you're going to be limited to that 15 nautical mile radius, assuming you're out compliant, which of course, as Mike pointed out, may very well be opened up in the near future. But you're also going to receive the air-to-air data from the compliant 1090 transponders, usually associated with the larger iron traffic. ADS-B weather, FIS-B. If you have a portable device, the ADS-B weather that you're getting from that device is, for all intents and purposes, equal to any FIS-B weather that you get from a panel-mounted integrated device. One of the biggest things that you will get into a discussion with when you talk to someone regarding what you're going to upgrade to is display compatibility. At the end of the day, whatever system that is purchased, you want to make sure that the data is going to be displayed where you want it and how you want it. The ADS-B out solutions, there's a lot of commonality between the different manufacturers out there, but the ADS-B in side of things tends to be a bit proprietary. As a general rule, it's not a solid rule, but you can't possibly go wrong if your main platform is Garmin, going with a Garmin solution. If your platform is Avidyne, going with an Avidyne solution. If it's King, going with a King solution, to assure that those systems will display the weather and traffic moving forward. There is some what I call interbreeding of this stuff, particularly with some of the ADS-B manufacturers that don't particularly have a system for display, meaning they don't have their own GPS systems. Some of those are capable of displaying on other manufacturers' devices. Unless it would be due diligence on your part to ask and investigate what formal relationships that maybe a NavWorks has with Garmin or a Free Flight has with Avidyne, to best assure that if that is the path that you're going to go, that you're going to have a continued support for the display of that data. The same is also true with app compatibility. Not all in solutions, whether you're talking about integrated systems or whether you're talking about portable systems, not all apps are created equal, and not all ADS-B in solutions will play with all apps. There is some protocol, I don't like the term, but I'll call it reverse engineering going on out there to make certain devices play with other devices, trying to obtain more of an open architecture. I'm finding that it is, even in those cases, again, it's important to understand what the relationships are between the app provider and the ADS-B in solution to best assure that you've got continuity moving forward.
That's a great point. I've had several phone calls, Todd, from people who were using a particular app with an ADS-B in product, often portable, but I guess they could be certified as well. And all of a sudden it stopped working, and what happened was it was a reverse engineered solution, and when a software upgrade came along, then that capability was lost. So that's a great point about making sure that the hardware you want to use is compatible, that there's a partnership between that hardware manufacturer and the app manufacturer, unless you're willing to change to another app. Some people are very fond of their flight management apps and don't want to change, and nothing wrong with that, but just realize that that needs to become a factor in your equipage decision.
Well, and trying to sort all that out for the average person can be a timely and confusing venture. So again, I kind of fall back to that rule number one, and that is that, before one pulls the trigger on a particular method, it is always best to get good counsel with somebody that's familiar with all the different products and all the different apps to understand, and even myself. I mean, I'm not going to know everything, but if I don't know the answer, I know where to get the answer. And, so again, that counsel can be the most valuable tool in this process, and that counsel is most likely going to be able to check things off the list for you or cross things off the list to get things narrowed down pretty quickly.
I agree completely. Let's take a second and for folks who haven't really looked at the hardware, what does an ADS-B out solution look like anyway? The Mode S extended squitter basically looks like a transponder because it's replacing your transponder. The universal access transceiver, which is the other ADS-B data link solution, is the blue box basically shown at the right in this photo. This picture shows a free flight UAT that Todd Shop installed in one of AOPA's Cessna Skyhawks, and his technician installed that UAT. It's connected to a GPS receiver, it's connected to a UAT antenna, and then to the right of the blue UAT box is a gold Wi-Fi module, and it's connected to the UAT, and that module is what causes the ADS-B in. This unit does ADS-B out and in, and that module sends the ADS-B in data to an Apple iPad for display. So it's a fairly small box. This particular installation was pretty easy because there was an existing shelf with room, so it was quick and clean and very efficient. Sometimes with the UAT, the shop has to build a bracket or otherwise figure out where to put the equipment. So that's one of the details that you'll learn more about when you move into the installation phase. So I think this was your slide, Todd, about some of the current, wanted to mention some of the current rebates and promotions that are going on.
Sure. And just for the record, and in my defense, that picture you just had up there so everybody understands, that was not a finished product. All the wires weren't tied, all the connectors weren't connected, so I got to make sure that I point that out.
Yeah, fair.
Anyway.
Just to give people context too, I'll go back to it just for a second, but that this is the back of the baggage compartment of the Cessna 172, so the back bulkhead would cover up everything there to the right. But yes, this is not finished. Actually, probably pretty close to finished, but not.
It's getting close, but there's a reason why those wire ties are still sitting there, because there's a few that need to be put on from what I see.
Exactly. Definitely a work in progress.
Sure.
Installed now and working fine.
Yes. There are a lot of things. There's some promotional pricing with ADS-B manufacturers that have already come and gone. They were trying to catch some, early bird action on the ADS-B thing, and I've had a lot of customers take advantage of that. But it is a fact that there's some of that promotional pricing that has now gone by. But there are still some others where, promotional pricing is still available. So, if the key is trying to determine what solution is right for you and then finding out whether that particular manufacturer's equipment still has any ongoing rebates. As we've seen in the past, with the ADS-B sales, and I'll get into that a little bit here at the end of this slide. There are occasionally some rebates and things that happen, particularly, around Christmas time. Sometimes there's a 4th of July sale, although typically not. But a lot of times you'll see, coupons floating around. Some manufacturers, if you go to Oshkosh or you go to Sun and Fun, if you attend a seminar, maybe they'll give you a $200 coupon to, redeem. There is some money out there. It certainly isn't going to get you all the way there, but every little bit can help. So you can keep an eye out on that stuff. If you're dealing with a particular avionics shop, they may have, an inside track on, something that maybe you hadn't heard of. So, don't forget to ask about those things. Of course, probably the biggest news lately, I'm sort of getting mixed reviews on. is the FAA's announcement of a $500 rebate projected, to come out sometime around September. I can't talk too much about that. I was hoping to actually contact them. I've got a number of questions myself, but the phones have been ringing so much I haven't been able to do that. Not sure how that's going to impact things. From what I read, before you can sign up for that, as I read it now, you need to have already had the conversation of what solution it is that you're going to go with. You have to have already pretty much decided what shop is going to do that for you, and have a good idea of what that installation date is going to be. So, for those of you that may be looking to sign up for that, you certainly have between now and then maybe to get that dialogue started with whoever you're going to consult with to maybe get some things ironed out. And lastly, considering scheduling and pricing, I have seen a number of things happening in the industry right now. I can speak of my own personal experience. We have actually, for those of you that don't know Lancaster Avionics, we basically have an avionics shop, and we have 14 people doing nothing but avionics. And we generally don't get into any of the larger airplanes. It's all the true general aviation side of things. I now have a split install schedule, which I've never had in the history of Lancaster Avionics, and even Lancaster Aviation before, which is where we started from. Our split schedule is my regular main installation schedule, and then I'm running a separate ADS-B installation schedule. Just as of this morning, my main install schedule, which is ADS-B or anything ADS-B plus something else, pushes it into the major, because that job is definitely going to take longer than a week. I'm currently out about mid-December right now with that, and my ADS-B schedule, my next slot is coming up in mid-November. I don't say that with the intention of coming across as bragging. But what I can tell you is, as I talk to other shops in the region, they are seeing the extended scheduling times as well. And as reported, I believe, by AOPA at some point, there is some concern about having enough manpower and shops out there to even get all this done by 2020. And I know there is a point of contention with that out there with the proposed date. But that being said, the longer you wait, the longer you'll probably have to wait as we get closer and closer to this timeline. The other potential downside to this from a consumer standpoint is that, the avionics industry for, let's say, dating July of 2014 and going back 8 to 10 years, really was kind of at a lull as far as the amount of work being done as far as avionics goes. And so therefore there probably was not much growth within even shop rates within that period of time in an effort to try to maintain competitiveness. Of course, with any business, when you've got work booked out further than you've ever seen before, I've predicted that there's at the very least going to be a market correction, if I can call it that, to sort of compensate for all of those years where rates, didn't go up, but yet costs did and margins got smaller. The question is, how far will that go? And I don't intend this to be a scare tactic, but there's always people out there taking advantage of situations, and hopefully that doesn't happen or happen too much. But it is something to keep in mind that the longer you wait, potentially, the higher labor rate you may pay as compared to sooner rather than later. And that's not a fun thing to talk about, but it is a reality as I'm seeing it out there. And that's pretty much all I've got on that.
Let me just add a couple quick details.
Sure.
As of July 1st, according to the FAA, 21,341 general aviation aircraft were equipped with ADS-B out. And you think, wow, 20,000, that's quite a few airplanes. One of the big question marks is how many aircraft actually have to be equipped by January 1st of 2020 in order to not lose the flexibility of flying in the airspace they normally fly. And that number could be anywhere from 90,000 up to 160,000 or more. Just about everybody has a different projection. Even the FAA has multiple projections because nobody's really sure. One thing that I've heard about, a number of shops are selling, I should have asked you, Todd, if you all were doing this yet or thinking about it, but a number of shops you can pay them a deposit and they will hold an ADS-B schedule, hold a slot on their shop schedule for your ADS-B installation, whether it's 2017, 2018. I'm not sure of anybody doing it beyond 2018, but
I have that. I have that
okay.
already. I've got 23 slots paid for and reserved between now and including 2019.
Okay, so shops are doing that. If you're concerned about shop time and you still, are far from knowing what you want, a lot of shops will let you schedule even though you've not selected your solution. So keep that in mind as an option to give you more time to make up your mind, but you still have ways of being sure that you're compliant in time for the deadline if that's important to you.
Well, and one of the reasons why I can even do that, yeah, you can flip to the next screen, that's fine. One of the reasons I can do that is because just about every ADS-B install, as long as all we're doing is an ADS-B solution, whether it's in and out or just out, I have yet to find just an ADS-B solution that has taken me more than a week. So if I basically block a week's period of time for that guy who gives me the deposit, I can be pretty rest assured that I'm not going to need more than that, which can create scheduling conflicts. If it turns out that it only takes 3 days, I'm sure it'll be easy enough for me to fill those last 2 days versus trying to find additional ample time. And so
Sure.
That's why that structure actually can work. So go ahead, Mike.
Okay, so 2 more slides and then we're into the case studies, I promise. Making sense of it all. So as you've gathered from the conversation so far, yes, you can certainly make a decision based only on adding ADS-B capabilities to your airplane, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but if you are thinking about getting lost GPS navigation capabilities, now's the time to consider that, because that could completely change the ADS-B solution for you in terms of what's going to most seamlessly integrate with what's installed in your aircraft or what will be installed. To help you figure this out, consider your answer to the 10 questions that are going to be on the next slide. These are questions that Todd asks anytime a customer inquires of his shop about ADS-B. When I called to schedule the UAT installation in hour 172, he went through this whole list of questions with me, and fortunately it didn't change my needs. I had come to the same conclusion independently in terms of the make and model of hardware, but it felt good to go through that process and realize that that our decision process was being validated. These questions can frame any aircraft owner's ADS-B conversation with any avionics shop. So Todd, I'll let you go through this. These are the same questions that our case study submissions answered and provided for the case studies that we'll see starting in the next slide.
Yep, and just to add a little bit to what you just said, I mean, when you say about it, it might be a good time to look at your panel. discussing your panel doesn't cost you anything other than, some of your time, and if you have to go to see somebody to talk to them, yeah, it costs you that. But, most people that, I've been talking to, they need to plan expenditures. And there's nothing that can drive you crazier than to know that you have to spend, dollars and just not have a handle on what that dollar amount is or what that solution is. So even if it's just an exercise to go through the process to figure out what the best solution may be for you, it gives each customer the opportunity to know where they're putting their feet down, and to start planning in a better way to what they're ultimately going to have to do. Mm-hmm. So that being said, if I'm having a conversation with a customer on the phone, obviously at that point I don't have the luxury of a photograph. Of course, if a customer comes and visits me personally, I can walk out to the airplane, and a lot of these questions may not get asked because I can see with my own eyes what the answers are. So if for example, I'm talking, to Mike right now on the phone, and he's calling me about his airplane, one of the first questions I'm going to ask him, do you have a WAAS GPS? And the relevance of that question is that if he already has a WAAS GPS that can be used as part of his ADS-B solution, well, that tells me right there that his ADS-B solution is going to be less expensive from a hardware standpoint because I can buy a version that doesn't have its own internal GPS. And let's say, for example, that Mike says, well, no, I don't have WAAS, but I do have a non-WAAS GPS receiver. Well, at that point, I'm going to find out, is this something that can be upgraded to WAAS, and discuss with him what those costs might be versus not upgrading it to WAAS and going with an ADS-B solution that may have its own WAAS receiver, which I can tell you on the surface, from a cost standpoint, buying the ADS-B solution under that scenario is less money than actually doing the WAAS upgrade and buying the extra hardware. But of course, at that point, you may be limited to some interfaces that may make the WAAS upgrade more desirable to you. And in a case where, Mike would say, well, I don't even have a GPS in the panel. Maybe I've got an old, Foster Loran as a boat anchor in there. That's the best I've got. That's where that's where I would start, prying a little bit and trying to get, Mike to think about where he might be 5 or 10 years down the line, because as I said earlier, your choice today could have an impact and potentially create a level of buyer's remorse if you end up putting that in the panel at a later date and wish you may have bought something a little different today. What kind of transponder you have? That becomes very relevant again. Do you have a newer digital transponder that maybe the better move is to go with a UAT solution? Or do you have an older transponder that, at some point down the road, you're going to have to replace anyway? And just to use, and again, don't get too fixated on the numbers, but a classic example is if a customer has an old Narco AT50A. I mean, not only is the transponder old, but Narco's no longer in business, and getting them repaired, and especially if a cavity tube goes out, it's basically beyond economical repair. Now, granted, that customer could elect to say, yeah, but I want to keep my transponder, and if it goes bad, I'll go out and buy another one that works for $300. Fine, that's another option. But here's an opportunity that if you incorporate your ADS-B solution as part of a new transponder, it may only cost you $700 or $1,000 more, and you cut the head off of having to deal with that snake down the line. So once we've established that, we've pretty much got a platform as far as ADS-B compliance, and we've probably narrowed things down a bit from the different manufacturers of what could be applicable for a choice. And then the big question comes up about what the customer's interest in ADS-B in might be. The receipt of ADS-B, FISB weather, and the TISB traffic. And I'm finding that most people, in one way, shape, or form, are definitely wanting to get the ADS-B in data. The question then becomes, how are you going to get it? And that leads to number 6. If you want it, where do you intend on displaying the data? And which follows into 7, it's the same thing, and then 8 and 9 gets into the app and the device that you're going to display it on. These all become relevant to the discussion because I can tell you that some of the apps that I rarely hear about, I will run into a customer that is just so adamant about that particular app. It's kind of like trying to get my wife to give up her favorite purse. I hope that doesn't sound sexist, but I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. That app is golden to them. So therefore, that may within itself define what the ADS-B solution for in is going to be. And of course, if it's an app that I think that his ADS-B solution, his best ADS-B solution won't work with that particular app, that's when I kind of get a little shy and stand back an extra step just in case somebody takes a swing. I asked if they're willing to change their app. So once you get through that list of questions, it's amazing how much it narrows the choices down for application for compliance and potentially ADS-B in any particular aircraft.
Excellent summary. So let's jump into our first case study. I would like to, before we jump into this, Todd, I'd just like to thank everyone who submitted their answers to Todd's questions as well as panel photos for consideration. We had, I kind of lost count, it was definitely more than 70 submissions. In fact, I got 1 or 2 this morning, but we'd already put the deck together, so it was too late to consider them. We will only be able to do a small fraction of these, but the ones that we picked, we hope will be situations that are applicable to a broader array of aircraft owners and not necessarily just the make and model at hand. So in lieu of our case study submitters, I'm going to play the role of the aircraft owners. Todd, why don't we go through the questions for this first submission from Ed Williams for his C-33 Bonanza.
Okay. Well, of course, guys, I have the luxury of having a picture of the panel as you guys are seeing it live as well. So just by looking at the panel with I'll say the trained eye, I've already got the answer to a number of the questions I would normally ask during a phone conversation. So, it's obvious at this point that there's not a WASP GPS in there. And in this particular case, the customer had no idea whether the GPS that he has there could even be upgraded to WASP or not, and of course the answer is no.
It's a KLN90B for anyone who can't recognize it in the slide.
Yes, sorry about that. I took that one for granted. Mike, the fact that you have a 90B, it's not able to be upgraded to WASP. Do you have interest in now or down the road having a WASP GPS in the aircraft?
Well, Todd, I would like to have a WASP GPS. I think it would give me some additional utility at some point in the future for my instrument flying. Okay.
And I can see from the panel that you've got a KT-76A transponder. Is that correct?
It is. It's a bulletproof transponder, but it is getting a little long in the tooth. Okay.
What about ADS-B in? Is that something you're willing to entertain?
I'm not really sure. I kind of think it might be nice to have ADS-B in on an iPad, but I really haven't had a chance to experience it. I haven't had a chance to fly with any other pilots. I'm not really sure if I want it.
Do you think that your answer is mainly cost dependent?
Well, cost is definitely a consideration, but everything I read, everybody's talking about how nice the traffic and weather is. So maybe a portable solution would give me give me that information on a tablet for a relatively low cost, and if I do upgrade to ADS-B out, I'll get all my traffic information, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. So you would be open to it.
I have used an iPad with ForeFlight, so maybe that's something I'd like to look at for an ADS-B in solution.
Okay. Well, I think, Mike, where we got to start here, ADS-B is the hot topic, but the root of everything else is a GPS navcom, and if you're serious about putting a GPS navcom in the airplane, that is really where we need to start. And unfortunately, especially monetarily, that is really the bigger decision of the two, and that within itself is going to steer what your ADS-B solution is. So under those circumstances, you basically have three different choices for, a GPS navcom. I'm reserving, I'm steering you towards a GPS navcom without getting into lengthy discussion. You could put a GPS only in that would meet these requirements, but based on the rest of the radio panel, I could give you a cost analysis to suggest that that's just not going to work out. So to cut right to the chase, if you're going to do it, it's going to be a GPS navcom. You are limited to basically like a King KSN 770, anything from the Avidyne IFD series 440 or 540. We could even discuss putting in a used GNS 430W or a 530W or the Garmin new GTN 650 or 750. And at this point, I would normally, and I'm not going to take the time to do it right now, is go into the discussion of all the pros and cons of all of those choices. And once that decision is made, that is where we would move into what ADS-B solution would be best. So if you just wanted to arbitrarily, not being biased to anything, just pick one, what do you think, Mike? You want to do a used 430W?
Well, actually, I was going to see what I've got a King stack there, and I've had King radios for a long time. So what about the King product you mentioned?
Okay. So we've discussed the pricing and the logistics of doing the King. At that point, what you're going to want to do, assuming that you're interested in ADS-B in and out, there is only one right solution for you at the moment. Now, whether you consider it fortunately or unfortunately, it is not going to involve your existing transponder. Your existing transponder would stay, or we could discuss replacing it independently with maybe a newer Mode C transponder. And of course, you're not flying above 18,000, you're not 135 or any of that, right?
Correct.
Okay. You're going to want to go with the King KGX 150. That is King's brand on a free flight manufactured product for King. It is very comparable to the FDL 978 XVR that Free Flight offers, but it's a special King version that is made to work with the KSN 770. And that will provide you with ADS-B out compliance. Unfortunately, at this point, the KSN 770 will not fully show all the weather and traffic on its own display. I am told that is coming down the line, but you will in fact get that data on your iPad, and we'll have to discuss apps at that point. So that's pretty much where we've gotten to with this particular case.
Okay. Well, then let's move on and see how many of these we can cover in the remaining time. Our next case study is Carl Poplawski's 1967 Piper Aero. Pretty traditional aero panel, it looks like there.
Yeah, and there's a lot of similarity between this one and the example before this. For all intents and purposes, both aircraft are basically starting with nothing. And as far as a WASH GPS or any of that, So again, you get into the discussion, of wanting to have a WASP GPS, and in this case, Carl has indicated that he did not want to have a WASP GPS. I'm just looking at his answers here. He clearly says he does not want GPS. He's got a KT-76A transponder. He is interested in ADS-B in, and he is perfectly content with having that data displayed on a handheld or portable. And he's currently using an Android, and he really has no preference with an app. There are a number of different options that Carl could look at here. Everything from just doing the minimum ADS-B out compliance and then buying a portable device like a Stratus or a GDL39 for his ADS-B in that would satisfy his requirements. He could step up to a UAT that is both in and out. But in this particular case, again, I would go back to the argument that I posed earlier. Given that he's got an older KT-76A, there is a strong possibility that we may have to replace an encoder as part of doing a UAT. I would probably recommend that he consider doing a transponder replacement. And again, that transponder replacement could be an ADS-B in-out solution, or it could be just an out solution and he could use a portable device. But he would definitely at that point be cutting the head off the snake at a minimal increase, at least in the big picture of things, by going with like a Garmin GTX 335 that has the built-in GPS, the new APPAREO unit, which if he decides he's going to use a Stratus as his portable device, has some special interconnect with the APPAREO transponder. And of course, there is the L3 NGT 9000, which is kind of a step above and unique to either one of those, but that is in fact an in-out solution with its own display. I don't necessarily think Carl would want to go with the NGT 9000 based on the answers that he's given. So I think it's pretty much narrowed things down if we just go out with the portable solution to either the Garmin 335 or the APPAREO ESG transponder.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Those would be two good solutions for him.
Yep.
So our next case study, and we might have been technically scheduled to end at 9:30 Eastern, but it looks like a lot of you are still hanging in with us, so I don't think we actually go dark for another 30 minutes at the top of the hour. So if you all are still with us and want us to continue, we'll keep going. So our next example...
and I'm sure we can get through the ones here within the next 30 minutes. I'm confident of that.
I hope so. We've got some backups in case we do.
Yep.
So Larry Church has an early Bonanza G36 with a non-WASP G1000. What are his options? I know there's a lot of Cessnas and other early glass cockpits that are in the same boat.
Yeah, well, anything that has the G1000 equipment in it, whether it's the ones that came non-WASP or the ones that came WASP, they're all basically in the same boat, whether it's Cessna, Beechcraft, Mooney, pretty much all in the same boat. The horrific news up until recently has been that the only way that you are going to get ADS-B out compliant and have integration into this high-end equipment was to physically upgrade any non-WASP aircraft to WASP, and that has changed recently with Garmin coming out with the remote-mounted version of their GTX 335 as well as their GTX 345. So the good news here for Larry is that he doesn't have to be staring down the barrel of that $25,000 to $30,000 WASP upgrade just to even get in the door to talk about ADS-B. In this particular case, what Larry's going to want to do, if he just wants ADS-B out compliant, he'll be able to go with the GTX 335. if he wants in and out. Even the non-WASP displays will display weather and traffic from ADS-B in. If he goes with the 345, it of course has the built-in Bluetooth that would allow him to use Garmin Pilot or ForeFlight to display the ADS-B weather and traffic on his iPad. The catch at the moment with that is that in order to display the weather and traffic, each one of the components within that G1000 has to be up to a minimum software version. In fact, there's a couple different tiers with that. For example, if he reaches the first tier, it'll display the traffic, but it won't display the weather. Once he reaches the second tier, then it'll display both the weather and the traffic. However, as of this discussion tonight, neither Cessna nor Beechcraft has a software rev, even on the WAS certified G1000 equipment. The G1000 GPS WAS receivers are not acceptable for ADS-B until a future software upgrade comes out that will allow the same GPS that's installed in the airplane to now be acceptable for ADS-B. So those guys that have the WAS certified G1000 equipment, there is some credence to waiting a bit longer until Beechcraft and Cessna release software that will allow us to buy the non-GPS version of the 335 or 345, saving a few bucks there. For the guys that are non-WAS and are not going to upgrade to WAS, they are locked in. They can do it today. We can put in the 335 or 345R with the built-in GPS, and its own independent WAS receiver will provide that data. And of course, that is not available to the pilots for navigational purposes. So that's pretty much a done deal. From what I've heard from Cessna and Beechcraft, the Garmin 335, 345 is the solution they've been waiting for. Now that it's here, now they're working on getting software released.
So the non-WAS G1000s, will they get the ADS-B in data? If they go with the 345, will they get the ADS-B in on their MFDs now, or do they still need, in many cases, a software upgrade for that to happen?
Yeah, again, to reiterate that depends on their current version of the equipment itself as of today. Okay. If there is a field loadable software version, let's just take this aircraft and create a hypothetical. Let's say the software for this G1000 has never been updated since the time it was brand new, but yet Beechcraft has come out with one or two software versions since then that don't get you all the way, to, well, of course this is a non-WAS unit, so you're not going to get there anyway, but let's say the customer decided that he didn't want these software upgrades. It's quite possible that the software version in these boxes would disallow display of traffic and weather until he would upgrade the software to what is available today, assuming those software upgrades exist, which would then give him the capability to do one or both of those things. However, in the meantime, if he wanted to pull the trigger on ADS-B compliance, he could put in the 345 and at least have it on his iPad using Garmin Pilot or ForeFlight and get the grunt work done, and that way he doesn't have to wait a long period of time. Once the software gets released, he can just schedule with the shop to come in, and while you wait, we'll upgrade the software and make that active as long as all the appropriate wiring was done at the point of installation. Okay. Does that answer your question, Mike?
Yes, it does. Hopefully it answers the questions for the early G1000 adopters out there.
Yeah, this situation, as far as ADS-B goes, this solution has, like I said, it's been what Garmin and Cessna has been waiting for. This is the one they locked in on. So
yeah, definitely.
We now have a path. Yep.
Yes. So our next case study is Andy Glasscock. He's a partner in a first-generation Cirrus SR-22.
Tell you what, Mike, just for the sake, I can't remember. We have another Cirrus on our list, don't we? Or not? I'm trying to steer the conversation here. I just want to make sure. No, I don't see another one on the list. All right, I'll cover it here. Okay, there are a lot of Cirrus aircraft out there, and of course, you know, the earlier generation Cirruses all had the the mixture of Garmin platform with the Avidyne displays. This particular customer obviously had his 430s removed, and it looks like he's got a pair of 650s in there, or are they the IFD? Yeah, he's got the pair of 650s in there. So this combination of 650s can synonymously be equal to the same Cirrus with 430 wash units in there. Of course, there are a lot of Cirruses out there that don't even have the WAS 430s. So again, you got the same discussion about, do you upgrade to WAS? Do you come up with some solution that you know would prevent you from having to spend all the money to make them WAS in order to become compliant? Those conversations all become relevant in that case. But in this particular case, he does have WAS units. There is this always becomes a big discussion with these kind of owners equipped with aircraft like this. As of right now, for all intents and purposes, a Garmin solution plays with Garmin and an Avidyne plays with Avidyne. So the choice has to be made more or less. Do you go with the Garmin platform and utilize those 650s for ADS-B, and understanding that most of the Cirruses usually have active traffic, TAS, and they also have XM weather. I would say the vast majority of people in this configuration generally do the Garmin ADS-B in-out solution. They display the in-out data on the GTNs or 430Ws, as well as get it Wi-Fi or Bluetooth to their iPad using Garmin Pilot or ForeFlight, which also gives them the ability to do flight plan transfer data, meaning you can do all your flight planning on the iPad, hit what I call the magic button on ForeFlight, which you can't see unless you've got this device, and it automatically sends your entire flight plan to, in this case, the number 650, or if it were a 430, the same would apply. That kind of functionality actually takes the older 430Ws and turns them into more of what a 650 is from a flight planning standpoint, because the 430s never had the ability to flight plan using airways, whereas the 650 does. But by virtue of being able to do it on ForeFlight, it will actually send a flight plan with airways on it to the 430 and make it work. The argument is that if you've got ADS-B, which, by the way, in this particular case, what you would end up with on the 650s is what they call composite traffic. That's a term that we haven't used up to this point. Composite traffic is where you blend the active traffic system with the ADS-B to show one target that is being seen by both systems. And typically what happens is it uses the accuracy and performance of the active traffic and then overlays the additional ADS-B data on top of that same target, showing it ultimately as a single target. He would get composite traffic on both Garmin units. He would get ADS-B only traffic on his iPad as well as the weather, but then he would reserve the XM weather and the TAS, the active traffic, on his MFD. If he wanted to take that one step further, he could actually add the Avidyne MLB 100, which is a receive-only box, and that box would then in turn put the ADS-B weather and traffic on the MFD in addition to what I've already described. The other way to go down this path is to forego the interfaces with the 430s or GTN 650s and either go with an Avidyne transponder, which would be a Mode S transponder for out compliance, combined with an MLB 100 as the receive, and that data would only show then on the MFD. Or the other option is they could go with a UAT from Avidyne, which is an MLX 200, and again, that would only work on the MFD. Conventionally speaking, as I said, most customers in this configuration will reserve the MFD for XM weather and active traffic.
Now, would his, when he upgraded the navigators, if he had gone with the Avidyne GPS comms, would that change his ADS?
That would definitely change the typical approach, because at that point you've got a full Avidyne suite, and at that point the only logical direction would then to go with one of the two combinations, either MLB 100 with Avidyne Transponder, or just doing the MLX 200 UAT, which then would equally blend all this data on every screen that he's got in the cockpit. But that's a perfect example of showing how the effect of choosing one manufacturer's product over another as far as your navigators go can dictate what direction you're going to go for ADS-B.
Sure. Yeah, you still have good choices with the Garmin navigators, but they would be different if they were the Avidyne product.
Yes.
So our next case study is David Wilcox. Looks like maybe an RV with Dynon equipment.
Yeah, David looks like he's pretty much a shoe-in for considering what Dynon is offering for an ADS-B solution. What exactly he needs to do is going to be dependent on what he's starting with. If he's got the newer style GPS antenna and receiver module, he could certainly retain it. If it's the older style, he would need to replace it, and that would basically give him a GPS that is suitable for the ADS-B solution. And at that point, he could buy the Avidyne transponder, which is a Mode S transponder, and that in effect would be his out compliance, combined with the Dynon UAT, which is SV ADS-B 470. That is a receiver-only system, and that would act as the receiving agent for the data. So that one's pretty clear-cut.
Okay.
I mean, there are other things that he can look at, but at the end of the day, nothing is going to be as integrated as that in this application.
Our next study is Jim Harris has an RV7A. He's got some Garmin avionics in his panel, and I wonder if his solution might be have some commonality to some certified aircraft.
Yeah, it does, and that's some of the uniqueness when we get into some of these type aircraft. You typically see a blend of type certificated type equipment, and then of course more the experimental side of things. Jim's answer to the question about upgrading to WAS, he had a yes but answer to that, and of course the but was, and I think he's kind of undercut the price a little bit here. He said, but at a cost of $3,200 each plus a higher Jeppesen subscription, I think that figure's probably it is definitely higher than that, so that may actually make his decision process easier. I'm sorry to say, but I get the sense that Jim's really kind of between a little bit of a rock and a hard place with the decision and budget on this. He does have the Garmin 330 transponder. That could be a plus for him, but he's got to answer the WAS GPS portion of that equation first. On one hand, let's see, what did he say about in and out here? iPad, GRT, and the other complication that he's got here, and I don't have an immediate answer for because I haven't run into it yet, is what the Grand Rapids displays that he has in there, the GRTs, I believe they're Grand Rapid.
Yeah, Grand Rapids.
I'm not sure what integration they're offering, what inputs they would have as far as displaying any data. That is something that I would have to research a little further. That could come into the equation. But you can see from the picture he's clearly got a unique mount there for an iPad device. This is a bit of a tough one because he could, if he wanted just to be ADS-B out compliant, it might behoove him just to replace the transponder, as much as I'd hate to say pull that 330 out and replace it with an APPAREO or a Garmin GTX 335 and then get a portable device to send the data to his iPad, which would negate the need to upgrade either of his 430s to WAS. That's one possibility. We could also look at some of the remote UAT out-only devices like the L3 2000 series, the NavWorks, the FreeFlight, something on that line. I think Jim really should seek some personal guidance on this because I think sentiment and tone with the answer to these questions could go a long way to help steering him to the right solution for him. So I think that's where I'm going to leave this one off because it's really a lot. It's harder to pin this one down unless I know a little bit more from him. But there's a few options that he can consider. I mean, he could go the whole 9 yards and end up, upgrading at least one of the 430s to WAS. He is not required to upgrade both to WAS. But that one WAS receiver would give him, the improved navigation, which he may or may not need, but it would provide that GPS source. At that point, he could upgrade his 330 for $1,200 to an ES and be out compliant and deal with a portable. Or he could go the whole 9 yards and do a UAT in and out, or he could go to a new transponder that's in and out that would eliminate any need for any portable device and have some really cool integration with that 430 WAS unit. So he's really got a lot of options available to him, so I think that's where I'm going to leave that one.
Well, and the only thing I was going to add was if he'd had a 430W already and the 330, the GTX 330 was extended Squitter, his path to compliance, at least for ADS-B out, would be literally having his avionics shop connect a couple wires and he's good to go.
Yeah, the big thing as I read his request is the physical cost of even one WAS upgrade, which
Sure.
He had stated it at $3,200. I think it's closer to actually $3,600 or $3,700, which is a published price from Garmin. So that may be a big factor for him.
Yeah. We've got 8 minutes because our drop dead time is at the top of the hour. We maybe can get one more in. Todd, I'm looking at the next one up. It's an interesting one, but I don't know if we have time for that. Should we skip down to the Mooney?
No, show it real quick.
Okay.
Guys, I just wanted to emphasize this one. This particular customer basically wrote a full page, maybe longer, no, actually 2 pages, maybe even 3 as I'm looking at it here, of all the different options he's looked at and the struggles that he's had with this particular aircraft. This is one of these aircraft where, he really needs to get the personal attention with the shop that's used to dealing with all the equipment. I think this one emphasizes more than any other example how important that relationship with a confidant that he could have to help guide him through this process and let that person put his hands on the airplane and come to judgment on what would be the right thing, and then establish that relationship with the LSA manufacturer to get an LOA with whatever it's going to be. I'm sure he's not the only one. It's a matter of getting the path greased with the LOA manufacturer that they're confident with, and then I think the rest of the aircraft similar will probably follow in the same line. So we'll leave that one at that. But he is an absolute classic case.
To show some of the information, he's very thoroughly researched the situation, and it's a pretty unique one, but it does show the situation that some operators and aircraft owners will be in.
Well, he even stated that he has issues with depth. So even though he's got a standard panel-mounted transponder, going to one of the Mode S versions may not even fit because of depth restrictions in the airplane. So he's really got a unique situation that's going to need personal attention.
Yeah, I agree. So Tom Williams has a 1966 Mooney M20 Echo.
Okay, and very basic panel. Looks like he's got an older Garmin VFR, possibly IFR en route GPS there.
He's actually one of the old Apollos, but he is interested in WASP GPS at some point in the future.
Yeah. And the MX-20 is actually, I think that's a GMX-200, I think he said. But the MX-20 and GMX-200 series MFDs, he's obviously paid money to put a big screen in there. The Garmin solutions, though it's not a perfect blend with those MFDs, it's actually a pretty good blend. What Garmin has done is they've gone back, because the MX-20 and GMX-200 were originally designed to work with the older GDL90, which of course is not an ADS-B compliant box.
Right.
What they've done is they've gone back in and they've created a path so that if you put in a GDL88 or something of that nature, a Garmin solution, you can, for lack of better terms, kind of trick it into thinking that it's interfaced with a GDL90, and then you'll basically get the same traffic and weather display that you would have expected to get from a GDL90, only with better signals, more information, that sort of thing, just because the later system works better. So in order to make that happen, he's probably going to have to stick with the Garmin brand. Starting with picking a GPS Navcom, and then from the way I'm seeing this here, he'd probably be a really good candidate to address the ADS-B in situation as part of the panel and replace the transponder, given that it's an old original KT-76. That's probably going to be the preferred method to get from here to there, unless he's willing to make some compromises on, it's not going to display here, or I'm not going to do it this way. But if he wants the best integration he can get utilizing that display there, that's the direction he's going to have to go.
Sounds like a very logical approach to that. Looks like we've got about 3 minutes, so I think we're going to just have to cut to our thank you slide, Todd.
Okay.
Everyone, thanks for joining us. Todd, I'd especially like to thank you for devoting an evening to our webinar, plus all the time that you and I have put in over the past few weeks preparing for it. I'd also like to send a special thanks to Kathy Donzilla of AOPA's Pilot Information Center. She's the webinar mistress who does all the behind-the-scenes stuff, because neither Todd nor I have a type rating in how to run this stuff. So thanks, Kathy, for making everything work so seamlessly and helping us look not like total fools. Remember that you can come back and replay this webinar at any point. Unfortunately, we did not get to time for questions, but we have learned that we have the technology to email everybody who registered for this webinar. So what we will try to do over the next week or so is go through the questions. It looks like we've gotten quite a few through the question feature, and a lot of them are similar questions, so we will try to aggregate those and then send an email to everybody who's attended. So we apologize we couldn't get to the questions tonight, but we will do our best to answer as many of them as we can, like I say, probably through a group email. Any closing words from you, Todd?
Other than, as you get those questions, if there's something somewhere that I can be assistance, I'm certainly willing to help you get those answered. Lastly, I really appreciate having the opportunity to come here and discuss this ADS-B topic with you, Mike, and our listeners out there. It's an interesting time, and I hope everybody can find that person out there that they feel comfortable, that's going to get the answers that they have. And like I said, if you get nothing else from from this webinar. I can't stress enough the importance of getting accurate information and so that you can make the decision that is right for you on many different levels. So, in fact, that was my main purpose tonight, was not for a shout out to Lancaster Avionics. It was more of an educational purpose for aircraft owners, to educate them, to make them better customers, and to empower you to have an idea of what questions to ask to get the end result that you're looking for.
The slide on the screen does have a couple of URLs. Todd has some very, very informative ADS-B resources on the Lancaster Avionics website. AOPA also has a number of ADS-B resources. If you're not familiar with them, please check them out. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope you all have a great evening. Fly right.
Take care, guys.